451. You ready? Together let us sweetly live. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Together, Lord, to Jesus sing. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan, bright Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan is my happy home. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Together let us watch and pray. I am bound for the land of Canaan, and wait redemption's joyous day. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan, bright Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan is my happy home. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Our songs of praise shall fill the skies. I am bound for the land of Canaan. While higher still our joy shall rise, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan, bright Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan is my happy home. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Then come with me, beloved friends. I am bound for the land of Canaan. The joys to come shall never end. I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan, bright Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Oh, Canaan is my happy home. I am bound for the land of Canaan.
Shall we put our devices on airplane mode?
Testing.
You can stop.
Okay, now let's begin with the silent prayer. So this morning I wanted to go through a line of progression, and this is the line of restoration. So Eden to Eden.
perhaps some of you are familiar with this already. So let's begin with diet. So what was the first diet that was given to mankind?
Fruits and nuts.
Okay.
Fruits and nuts. Fruits and vegetables.
Without having to write everything that we're allowed to eat on the board.
Vegetarian. Veganism.
Vegan. I get, yeah, veganism, or you could say plant-based. But yeah, so in Eden they're vegan, and then what happens?
Sin enters, and they're allowed to eat meat.
Yeah. So sin enters.
Switch now and name
They're not allowed to eat meat right away.
Yeah. It was afternoon.
It was after Noah.
Yeah, and
It was
6
after
degrees
Noah.
After sin,
Yeah.
at first they eat fruits and nuts, and then afterwards they're allowed to eat the vegetables.
Yeah.
After sin, eat vegetables and herbs.
But
It says in Genesis 1, verse 29, fruit of the tree yielding seed, and then I've given you green herbs for meat.
So herbs were included at that point.
And vegetables came after they tilled. They were outside of Eden. Then they were root vegetables were after they tilled the ground.
okay,
That doesn't matter.
I guess for the purpose of this study, they just weren't eating anything that was from the animal. And then you have sin that enters, and what happens in the time of Noah?
Flood. The vegetation destroyed.
Lack of vegetation permitted them to eat clean meats.
Okay, let's go to Genesis 9. Genesis chapter 9. We'll just read the first couple verses, maybe 1 to 4. If somebody would like to read that, nice and loud.
And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be faithful and multiply, and be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the, I can't read. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even the green herb have I given you, all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat.
Okay, thank you. So what do you notice in this, in verse 2? No, verse 1. Who else receives this charge?
Noah and his sons.
The animals? Or wait, let me read it.
My question is, who else receives this charge? In verse 1, it says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Who received that charge?
The ones that were replenished, the children, grandchildren.
Well, Noah and his descendants.
Before this, though, who was told to do that?
Adam
Adam and Eve, right? So Adam and Eve also received that charge at the very beginning. They were to be fruitful and multiply. But the diet that was given in Eden is not the same diet then that's given to Noah. Can you see that that is the difference here? They're, because the earth it's wiped out, right? It's a brand new earth again, but he doesn't give the same charge. And does he limit it to just his people? Like, does he say, I'm going to have you guys be vegan, you guys aren't allowed to eat meat, but everybody else can eat meat?
No.
No, it's for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then we come down to the time of Moses, which is the Alpha of ancient Israel. And let me put that here. And what do you have in this time period in regards to diet?
Well,
Manna.
well, God, give instruction in what type of meat, they are
Okay,
able to eat.
How the meat is supposed to be prepared.
so it's
Codified.
codified. So you can still eat meat, so I guess I should put that here. So a meat diet is given, and it continues on, but now this meat diet is just codified.
I don't know, my camera, the green is not the best color.
Oh, but it works.
Good diet, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so,
I love that, actually.
yeah, I'm really like that.
Can you use red?
Yeah, I think it works better.
It's defined by.
Okay, what is
Like what?
water?
Sister Tiffany, what do you mean by codified?
We will get to that. Okay, so then there's meat. Meat
Oh.
still. That's codified.
Can I mention that even with Noah, there was still a code that was put into place too, and that is not taking part of any blood.
And also clean and unclean. He would have had some concept because there were 7 sets of clean animals went on and then
Yeah,
the other way around. No, that way around in.
there
2
were
by 2.
Two
That's
sets
right.
for the unclean and 7 sets of the clean.
Okay, so
Coding, yeah.
So yeah, it's just saying how to practice meat eating. That's what it means to be codified. They're given rules and regulations, like as Brother Henry was saying. So meat in ancient Israel is now codified. There's rules and regulations. You can't just eat whatever you want. It's specific to rules and regulations.
Deuteronomy 14 and Leviticus 11.
So go to, we're going to go to in the Omega of ancient Israel, and I guess and what happens in this time period? Is there any change to diet?
They're still eating
There's no
fish.
change at that time. It's just that we know that Christ ate meat or fish.
Okay, so let's go to Luke 24, verse maybe 35 or 34. We'll start with. Hold on. Somebody would like to read. This is after his death and resurrection, right? And they're all gathered together and Jesus appears and they're really terrified about that. Does anybody know why they're terrified?
Because they thought him to be a ghost.
Yeah, they thought it was a spirit. They didn't think it was flesh and blood. So he's saying, peace be unto you. And somebody would like to read verses 38 to, we're in chapter 24.
Luke 24.
Somebody want to read that or do you want me to?
Which you didn't say anything.
38 to 41. Or 42 actually.
And he said unto them, why are ye troubled, And why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit has no flesh and bones, as ye see me have. And when he had thus spoken, he shewed them his hand and his feet. And while they yet believed not for joy and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here any meat? And they gave him a piece of a broiled fish and a corn comb.
And the next one, sorry.
And he took it and did eat before them.
So that verse 41 that he eats. Anyways, we have Christ eating meat.
Yeah,
So-
43.
Is there any? It's 43.
Yeah, 43 is where he eats it.
Okay. So we have Christ eating meat. Has anybody? Yeah.
No, finish. I was just gonna say that it was interesting because did Christ eat meat back with Abraham when he prepared for the visitors that meat for them to eat?
Yeah. I guess I could put that here. Okay. That's a good point. So this is, I don't know about anybody here, but for most Adventists, I think this is what trips them up. This ancient Israel, like Omega, is a kind of seems closer to our history, but when it comes to like Moses' time, it just seems forever ago, and Noah and Abraham. And then you have Christ, he's our example, so that it gets really, it was hard for me, I'm not going to lie. I didn't really understand how we can justify saying we can't eat meat. It never, I believed the writings, but I didn't understand how it worked. Especially because he's glorified. So one of the things that would be said is we have to prepare for Eden. So how can we go to heaven if we're not prepared for Eden? And yet Christ went to heaven, comes down, has fishing, and he's going back to Eden. So it was always very confusing for me. But there is no condemnation here of meat eating. There isn't. They're able to eat it. Christ ate it. Okay, so then we get into the Millerite time period, and what happens?
We're counseled to eat. No, I'm not gonna go there because you just don't eat eggs and stuff. So I don't know. Those,
Vegetarian.
yeah, vegetarian.
Don't meat, which is vegetarian, and dairy is permitted.
Okay, so what have we been calling that?
Meat for the meatless.
It wouldn't be meat codified.
Let's say vegetarian, because eggs is vegetarian,
Yeah, eggs is a
and
meat
dairy is
base.
vegetarian.
It's meat based.
So I just say. We'll just go to, I'll just put let's go to the quote, CD 205.4. So if we can go there, all throughout the Bible up until, okay, this, sorry, I didn't say, this represents Revelation. So this is the Bible here, this portion. That represents Revelation, and then we're going into the Millerite history. So if somebody, well, maybe I'll just read it, but 205.4, and she says, we are brought into connection with the masses. Should health reform be taught, then in its most extreme form, harm would be done. We ask them to leave off eating and drinking tea and coffee, this as well. But some say that milk also should be given up. This is a subject that needs to be carefully handled. There are poor families whose diet consists of bread and milk, and if they can get it, a little fruit. All flesh food should be discarded, but vegetables should be made palatable with a little milk or cream or something equivalent. The poor say when health reform is presented to them, what shall we eat? We cannot afford to buy the nut foods. As I preach the gospel to the poor, I am instructed to tell them to eat that food which is most nourishing. I cannot say to them, you must not eat eggs or milk or cream. You must use no butter in the preparation of food. The gospel must be preached to the poor, and the time has not yet come to prescribe the strictest diet. So meat becomes what? Not allowed, right? Yes.
Perhaps the name Millerite would not be quite appropriate because Millerite is still up to 1844.
Yeah. Okay.
Early Adventist, I would rather say, because at that point in time, even Ellen White herself still did eat flesh foods.
We just ancient Israel, and this is going to be modern Israel. So you have
Early Adventism.
Brother Henry, could we also say though that she had the counsel and the instruction of not eating meat, but it took her time to get to that point to where she was not including the animals?
But it was well after 1844.
Yeah.
Even this book here is 1938.
That's a revised version, 38.
I know, but
Well, everyone else is doing it, right?
The thing is that you have to compare, if you have an Bible, if you have an American Heritage, you need to give a title to your.
they're not Adventists since 1798.
We just call it the amendment.
Pioneers.
Okay. So I'm gonna pioneers.
Pioneers.
Okay, that. All right, so what is the strictest diet? In this quote, she says, the time has not yet come to prescribe the strictest diet. What is the strictest diet she's referring to?
Veganism.
Okay, so I'm not gonna put it here because the time hasn't come. So they're still eating eggs and milk. So.
You can say vegetarian, like Sister Alice said. This included vegetarian. Yeah, exactly. There's different levels of vegetarian.
vegetarian would be good.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we can go to CD 411. And we'll read, we'll start at, do you want me to write it on the board too?
Yes, please.
Okay, so CD 411, we'll just start in one, but we'll go. It says, I present the word of the Lord God of Israel. Because of transgression, the curse of God has come upon the earth itself, and upon the cattle, and upon all flesh. Human beings are suffering the result of their own course of action in departing from the commandments of God. The beasts also suffer under the curse. So one thing I forgot to mention is what happens to what happens in this time period? It was a curse, right? It was a curse for them to eat meat because God had said he didn't want them to live as long, right? So it's a curse that begins here. So, and this quote, she's saying that it was because of a curse that this has come upon us. It's a result of their own course of action from departing from the commandments of God. So then she goes on to clearly say meat eating should not come into the prescription for any invalids from any physicians from among those who understand these things. Disease in cattle is making meat eating a dangerous matter. The Lord's curses upon the earth, upon man, upon beasts, upon the fish in the sea, and as transgression becomes almost universal, The curse will be permitted to become as broad and as deep as the transgression. Diseases contracted by the use of meat. The diseased flesh of these dead carcasses is sold in the marketplaces, and disease among men is the sure result. So the Lord would bring his people to a position where they will not touch or taste the flesh of dead animals. Then let not these things be prescribed by any physician who have a knowledge of the truth for this time. There is no safety in the eating of the flesh of dead animals, and in a short time, the milk of cows will be excluded from the diet of God's commandment-keeping people. In a short time, it will not be safe to use anything that comes from the animal creation. Those who take God at his word and obey his commandments with a whole heart will be blessed. He will be their shield of protection, but the Lord will not be trifled with. Distrust, disobedience, alienation from God's will and way will place the sinner in a position where the Lord cannot give him his divine favor. Again, I will refer to the diet question. We cannot now do as we have ventured to do in the past in regard to meat eating. It has always been a curse to the human family, but now it is made particularly so in the curse which God has pronounced upon the herds of the field because of man's transgression and sin. So I just want you to know that it is because of the curse that these things have taken place. And why, okay, so we know that what's our diet restrictions here, or what do we promote?
Whole food, plant-based diet.
Okay, yes, so we go back to, she says in a short time, and if you actually consider this 6,000 years and then her years, it is a very short time on this timeline, which I find interesting because we don't think it's a short time if we consider her time. But when you're looking at the whole reform line, it is actually a very short time. So why do Adventists have a problem with this? Or why did I even have a problem with this? Or did anybody ever have a problem with this? It's just me.
It's just you.
Really?
Well,
No.
no, I didn't have a problem with it, but there was justification. Because I wasn't always vegan, so it did take progressive steps for me to become completely vegan. But there was that justification. Well, Christ ate meat, so I can eat it too. I do remember myself even saying that. So yeah, I will say that. But it wasn't so much of a struggle. I guess I was more scared because knowing that about being vegetarian and vegan, my family was a little bit more we were conservative on some points, but some points we were liberal. So in our household, we knew that eating a healthy diet was good, but we still made those exceptions with those quotes from Ellen G. White and Christ eating meat that, we can eat what we can best afford at this time or things like that. So yeah. It wasn't so much of a struggle, but more of like, how am I going to do this? There is challenges from going from eating meat and all these things and then becoming vegan, because you have to know how to meal prep and all that stuff. But I don't want to go on a tangent. That's just, I digress. But yeah.
So Ellen White says we're no longer allowed to eat flesh. And we take a hard stand and say we're not allowed to eat eggs or milk or anything from an animal. And she has said the time has not yet come. And I guess why I struggled with it so much was there wasn't a definite when that time would come. And it was really hard to understand why for me, because I knew Christ ate meat and my brain couldn't be wrapped around it. I still, I was following the law, the letter of the law, but my mind and heart wasn't understanding completely until I saw this line. So why is Christ eating fish in this time period? Even after his glorification?
So That was a custom of that time. I mean, of them eating that.
Yeah, so he's living in this, he's appearing in this dispensation, and he is subject to the rules and laws of that dispensation. And it's not the same in every dispensation. So, did you say something?
No, didn't say a word.
So we're subject also to the laws and rules of our dispensation. And in Ellen White's dispensation, it wasn't yet time to have this diet of no eggs, the vegan diet.
But didn't she give it up?
She may have at the end, but she definitely had been eating those things.
She makes the point at the end of the paragraph as well that, well, she says the milk of the cows will also be excluded. The next sentence she says, in a short time it will not be safe to use anything. That's in paragraph 0.3. And then the end of point 4 on 2.1, she says, in eating meat, we partake of diseased dead flesh. At the sentence before, she says, the thought of feeding on dead flesh is repulsive, but there is something beside this. In eating meat, we partake of diseased dead flesh, and this sows its seed of corruption in the human organism. So she's making a point that it's diseased, it's not safe. So it's more than just the milk and the flesh. So I think you can put that argument across that in Christ's time, I think the dispensation argument is a good one. But also the fact that the disease isn't perhaps quite as prevalent as it is now, because she's making that point in nowadays. The disease is what's going to make it. So even in her day, it's okay still to have the milk, but there's coming a point when it's going to be so diseased, it's not safe anymore. Right. Plus, they're looking at the context of the people and their needs. So I see that with Christ as well. He just meets people where they are. So he's meeting the disciples where they are by eating that fish. It's almost like it's a sacrifice on his behalf to minister to people. And how far can he go, but within his dispensation?
Yeah, but I think when new Adventists come into the movement, or anybody, and they see this, they always say, where's her quote? Where's her verse? To say that, I mean, sure, I mean, you can say studies in science and they're out there, but then you have other people reading false studies in science. So I just think it's very hard because they want a biblical proof. They don't want anything else. They want a quote.
Same with slavery, same with gender, same with every issue we're facing.
Who's they?
People that come in, or even like we've split as a movement over what issue?
Equality.
Sure, but it really is interesting that they don't accept dispensationalism, and when we taught it, they say it that we're going off into what I don't know what they say, but darkness, and yeah, we're accepting this doctrine of whoever. But dispensationalism, they practice it every day.
Yeah.
So that's the whole point, is that they are claiming that we need to be vegan, right, but they have no quote from the Bible or no justification to do that. And so we're going to look at now, I guess I can't use other colors. I'll just go black.
Please red.
I don't know. Will red pick up?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will go. Well, I'll just use black again. So we're going to go to race now. So what do we have in the beginning when we're thinking about race?
Adam and Eve, the children of Seth.
At the time of Eden, everyone is equal. So here we have. So here we have equality, and then what happens here?
Tower of Babel.
Okay, before the Tower of Babel.
The woman would be ruled over by the husband, or how, what's the word?
But this one,
She'd be desirous towards it.
That's enough how Canaan.
So we have, we have Ham, and what happens?
Well, we have gender inequality first.
It's true, because
Yes.
right after sin, there is
Because right
not
after
that
sin, it's
equality
Adam and
anymore.
Eve and that whole thing.
Okay, let's go to, we have the curse that comes in. So let's go to Genesis 9, verse 25. My computer just died. Does somebody have a charger I can use?
Yeah, do you take that?
I don't know if my charger will work, but
I'm trying.
Thank you. Anyways, let's go to Genesis 9:25, and if someone can read it.
And he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of serpents shall he be unto his brethren.
Okay, so what is it there? What it clearly says, right?
Canaan is that of Ham, which, verse 22 mentions that. It says, in Ham, the father of Canaan. So the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. So that's the reason why the curse.
So here you have the curse, and it's the curse of slavery, right? So you have this curse that comes in where they have to be, they're going to be servants. And in Abraham's time, what do you have?
Why slavery? What does it say?
Abraham
20.
has his whole economy based on slavery.
Yeah,
Oh,
Abraham has slaves,
26.
and
Canaan shall be a servant.
there's,
yeah, I got it, servant.
Leviticus has slave laws.
yeah. And then in this time period, what happens?
This is when it's kind of codified.
Yeah, it is. Slavery is codified. Okay, and then we go into Christ's time, and has anything changed? Or the Alpha, the Omega history of ancient Israel? Nothing has changed, right? So in the book of Ephesians 6, you have, in Philemon, you have Paul telling the slave to go back to his master, right? Philemon? Yes.
Which chapter? Which verse?
This is so weird for you to say.
That's one chapter.
It's only one chapter.
What number?
Chapter 1.
Oh, yeah, but what verse?
Just read, it's the whole story about it.
I know, I'm just trying to read.
And so you have, I'll put the book here. I think I spelled it right.
Do verse 12 if you want. Yeah.
Okay, so the slave is told to go back to his master. Sorry, it's fine where I am. Okay, okay, yeah. But it is interesting though, because when Paul actually tells the slave to go back to his master, when he's writing to Philemon, he actually tells him to accept him as a brother. And that's really unheard of at the time, because he had the right to throw him into prison, to do whatever, to punish him. But you have Paul actually saying, accept him as a brother. And then you have Galatians. Is it Galatians? No, Ephesians, sorry. Ephesians 6. And what does it say in Ephesians 6? Ephesians chapter 6. Does anybody know offhand? It's verse 5. But do you know what's said there? Servants,
Be obedient to your master.
Yeah, be obedient to your master. So you have in the New Testament, you still have them saying, obey your master as unto the Lord. So then you go to, let's go to our modern Israel, and what do you have in Ellen White's time period?
Slavery.
Okay. But what is she saying about slavery? Like,
It's a curse.
okay, so
One was from.
so all of a sudden, yeah. Okay, so slavery is now a sin. Okay, so
And that's interesting, that meat now becomes a sin as well.
right, that is interesting.
It's really parallel.
Yeah. So slavery is not only a sin, but it was a curse from the beginning, right? So you have the same pattern happening here. There's a curse. This curse is happening. They're still, doing these things, but there comes to a point in time where God is trying to change that. What is the South saying at that time? Bible says slavery is good. And what are they asking for? Nope, they're asking for a verse or proof in the Bible to show that slavery is a sin. And is there one? No, there's not. So it's not easy for her to prove that slavery is a sin just by reading a verse or a comment. So people in the South were stumbling over this issue just like Adventists stumble over the issue of diet. It's the same. Who says we can't eat? Where is this recorded in the Bible? Slavery equals a sin, but what else does she say? At that time period, what else is happening? What is she saying?
Don't rise up and fight. She's still saying that you can't intermarry. Don't intermarry. And she's saying, yeah.
So there's still no equality, right? She's saying not to fight for equality and not to make any political attempts to try to change it. They were not to push desegregation. And as Sister Victoria said, no interracial marriages and
Separate churches, I think, as well.
separate churches. Well, yeah, in the South especially. And what happens just prior to our time? Just like right after that, in this small gap, what takes place here? What happens? What movement rises up?
The civil rights.
Yes. So here you have the civil rights.
It's interesting, she says about separate churches, not for the black perspective, but from the whites, because the whites can't cope with it yet. So I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah. So here you have the civil rights movement rise up. And is this a good thing?
Yes.
Of course, right? But it is a good thing. But this movement is saying to do exactly what Ellen White said not to do. Like, exactly. So as long as we can see that.
So, explain.
Well, she says not to use any political voice to change the current equality. That's exactly what the civil rights movement was. It's exactly what it was. So you have this time period just before ours. And now what are we saying in our time period?
That you can, that you can intermarry, that you can,
It's all the opposite.
yes, all the opposite.
The women are equal to the men. There's no slavery, we're all equal.
We're not doing women yet,
Stick to the
but
license in.
and to sum it up, we have Obama for our time. And this is a good thing. prophetically, he is good, and
You have to put Trump in there too, don't you?
Nope.
No, because he's the opposite. He's like all the, oh, okay.
no, I'm just doing the line
Yeah.
of,
I know I get it.
I will at the very end. So now we're going to look at what Ali mentioned, which is gender. So let's go to Eden, and what do we have in Eden? Okay, so we have equality.
Do we want to put internal, what we should have seen at these times? Because internally, at the slavery point, you've got William Ford. So you've got a black man in there in American history, and then in our time, you've got Paminda.
We're gonna do that later.
Okay. No, it's brown though. Somebody made that point the other day, I'm not sure. I'm not good about it. No, this is not black. The FFA.
It's not white, let's just say that.
That part of the rejection of the message in 2012 is that his race.
Okay,
Anyway, that's it.
so we're gonna look at gender, and they're equal in Eden. Dominion was given to both of them. They were equal shoulder to shoulder, right? And then what happens? Sin comes in, and then you have this curse, and Eve is led to what? Submit. Okay, so then she's led to submission. We come to the time of Abraham, which just was hugely like an aha moment for me. And what happens in Abraham's time period? He's promised a child, and so God tells this to Abraham, right? And do you think that Abraham thinks that Sarah needs to be any part of that promised son? Does he think Sarah needs to be part of it?
No, not really.
No.
I don't know if he thinks about it too hard. She kind of promotes him, but
Because she pushes it, she's her own worst enemy.
But,
Yeah.
She's her own worst enemy.
but
yeah,
at the
she's her
same
own
time,
person.
that is a good point to bring up though,
So they're
because
both
But I would put the case before that.
inequality.
Yeah, when he lied to Pharaoh, what's he doing with her? He's like, I don't want to die. She can die for me instead of me. And he I don't know what he conceptualizes is going to happen when he says that, but he's already figuring they're going to try and kill him to get her. So if he says, I'm the brother, what's he doing? He's saying, you take her. He's kind of prepared for her to go through adulterous relationship or suffer in some way so that he doesn't suffer, which is real sexism.
Abraham does not think that it's important for Sarah to be a part of this, because even if it was just Sarah obviously doesn't think it's important for her to be part of the promise, because she's the one who tells him to have her servant. But he goes along with it. So he couldn't possibly think that she needed to be involved, or he wouldn't have thought that that was a great idea, or that was something that could be done.
can I say something though too? Because that is a good point to bring up, but then the whole issue was her age, wasn't it too? Because she was 90. Yeah.
Not when the
Obviously
promise,
she was married.
I don't think when the promise was given. Was it when the promise
They
was
didn't have
given?
faith. That was the other issue.
But
They
it's
didn't
10
have
years from
faith.
the promise to when she pushes Hagar. So they waited 10 years already.
Yeah, they didn't have
It was
faith.
10 years.
10
That
years.
was, yeah, that was
So
the
he's
issue of
75,
faith.
he's 85 now, so she's probably quite old.
Yeah, that was the issue of faith too, because she lapsed when
That's
when
later,
Christ-
yeah.
Yeah,
she
that's
laughs,
it.
it's
She
the year
does
before,
laugh.
so she's
Yeah,
definitely past it by then.
yeah.
But when we think of the time, it's actually quite a big test. So
Yeah.
they've been tested 10 years, and 10 is a symbol of testing, so they've had that test and they don't really pass it when he does the Hagar.
Yeah.
But in summary, Abraham doesn't think it matters. He thinks it's only his seed that matters, and it shouldn't matter whether or not she's a part of it.
And
So
you could-
God has to teach both of them. Like, he has to help both of them to get through that.
And you could
misunderstanding.
argue he's a product of his society because, I mean, from the beginning, God just promotes the lines through the male.
Yeah.
This man gave birth to this father. Even the daughters aren't mentioned, are they, in these genealogies? That we have?
Except for Dina. I mean, at that time, Dina was.
But Stephen's not round yet, so I'm just thinking that the
Oh,
model we
right.
have
Yeah, right.
is all male.
So it continues the same, you just have submission codified. And then you come to Christ's time, and what happens in Christ's time? Is there any change to that? Well, who gets the message this time in Christ's time? Yeah, they both receive the message. So the angel appears to Mary as well as to Joseph. And if you actually look at the story, even Elizabeth and Mary are a big part of it now. So also in this time period, you have what happening in regards to the covenant.
Women are being baptized.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put that here. So you have Mary and Elizabeth. You also have baptism. But let's go to Ephesians 5:22, and what does it say? Ephesians 5.
Submit.
So has anything changed?
Not really.
Not really, no. So all throughout this time period, you have, again, women being told to submit. Just like in this time period, when Paul is saying, accept him back, accept his servant back, and accept him as a brother. That's different, but it's still, you're still a slave and you're still gonna serve. Same with what's happening in Christ's time period. You have women, I guess, if not equal here, they are equal here, but they're still told to submit. There's still this, this process that needs to change. So then we come into Ellen White's time period, and what happens?
They don't vote.
Yeah, so we still, go ahead.
They don't want vote.
Yes, that's what I was saying. Sister White, she gave the instructions for the women to not go vote.
Okay. Yeah. So, but even without looking at her writings, what does God do in this time period? He gives who,
Sister White is raised up, and she's a woman.
so you have Ellen White here, and she receives the visions.
The authority.
So you have Ellen White receiving the visions, and we're going to go to 10 MR 69.2.
You read it?
Yeah. So, but yeah, without, what did I say?
69.2.
Yes, 10 MR 69. We can start at 1. You can go to 2 too. So you have, without even reading anything, you have an understanding that God has chosen this woman to receive the visions. So here is a discussion of women's suffrage. It's 10 MR 69.1 and 2. Just to summarize the first part, it's talking about basically how the women don't have a right to vote, and all the problems that are happening if a woman is out walking on the street by herself without her husband or an accompaniment of a man. She will be taken and put into a brothel, I think it's called, and did I say it right? Brothel. And it's just a horrible, horrible situation. There is, it's just pure evil what's taking place. And at the very last sentence of 10 MR, I'm going to read it. It says, no examination is made of the men, and where this law is carried into effect, the crime and immorality resemble the condition of the world which existed previous to the flood. So the next paragraph, it says, Mrs. Graves viewed the matter as I do in regard to the increase of crime and demoralization of society. She says women must vote if this law is to be withstood. We had a long talk in regard to temperance. I told her that my mind was unprepared for any such matter as women voting. She had been thinking and dwelling upon these things, and her mind was ripe upon them, while my work was of another character. We were doing upon the point of temperance what no other class of people in the world were. We were as in much favor of a pledge against tobacco as a liquor. Okay, that part ending doesn't, but she is sympathizing with this woman. So she's agreeing with these things. But again, in her writings though, she is not, she's telling them not to push this thing politically, right? So
It's interesting because if they listened, we wouldn't be where we are today, kind of, I believe. And some people didn't step out and do that.
okay, so in our time, what happens just before this time period at the end? What do we have? Yeah, but what's the movement?
Feminine,
Women's rights.
So is this a good movement?
yes.
But what are they doing?
It's opposite of what she recommended.
They're fighting for
The
women's
same thing
rights.
that happened here. They're doing the exact thing that Ellen White said not to do, not to go through political,
Usefully to believe.
not to use the political, yes, politics. And that's exactly what they're doing. And then in our time, we have,
But at the same time, she's campaigning on temperance and pushing for that. Temperance societies
yeah. So also I want to say here, so her mind's not ready, so she's not ready. Her mind's not right, right? But her friend's is, so, and not to. You don't have hers. Okay. What time do I'm done soon, okay?
15 minutes.
No political attempt to change anything. All right, well, that is, so we've come to our time now where we are saying that equality, women are allowed to teach, they're allowed to preach, they're allowed to be elders. They are equal, just like they were equal in Eden. And I want to also bring in what many of you were saying, which is we have an interesting, I'll just put it here, just because of space. So I want to just, in closing, share this last part, which is what God was trying to do in the Millwright history.
It's for girls.
In ancient Israel. So he raises up, who was the first person who received a vision? It's boy. And then you have boss. And then you have Ellen White. Okay, and then you have
What?
Obama,
Uh,
and we have Trump. We have Clinton. I guess I should have not done it this way, but I should have done the other one first. And in our time, we have who? We have Linder. We have Jeff. So even in the Millerite, I guess I should not have done that. So in the Millerite history, we have God already trying to have his people understand the importance of this equality. Prophetically, Clinton would have been the right person to choose. And I don't know, William, I just want to read this section because I thought it was interesting since Tabo was mentioning the shut door yesterday. So if you go to, I don't know if this is in, I don't know if this is in your LMI estate, I found it online. MOL. I forget, I should have wrote what it stands for.
What was that?
Messenger of the Lord, but I don't know if it's her writings, but it's called Messenger of the Lord. And it's on page
Do you know what the acronym is?
MOL. So I don't think it is her writings.
It might be in Pioneers. It's a bio, I think it's a biography about her. Is it by her?
But it just shows, it just tells the history. It just tells how Foy was the first one to receive the vision. He was a black man. God could have chosen anyone he wanted to, and he chose him. Then he sends the message to Foss, and I'm sure there were other people he could have chosen, but Foss rejects the message, and then it's given to Ellen White. So I want to read the last one because it was really interesting. It says, Hazen met Ellen in Portland, Maine. Though invited into the meeting, he remained outside the closed door, though close enough to hear her message. The next day he told Ellen, the Lord gave me a message to bear to his people, and I refused after being told the consequences. I was proud, I was unreconciled to the disappointment. I heard you talk last night. I believe the visions are taken from me and given to you. Do not refuse to obey God, for it will be at the peril of your soul. I am a lost man. You are chosen of God. Be faithful in doing your work, and the crown I might have had, you will receive. So I just thought it was really interesting how the door was closed, and he was close enough to hear. I just find that fascinating because it's regarding, well, in this case, it was given to him, but it's Ellen that's receiving the message, and in the time of our shaking as well, it was at the time of when Tess was anointed, and it's just interesting that they're close enough to hear the message, but it seems like they're outside of the door. Wow. So I guess in ending, we can read PH 104.
PH?
Yeah, PH 104. We'll start.
Where's PH?
I don't know.
is in pioneer writings. That book isn't in pioneer writings. The similar thought is there. It doesn't say shut door, but it says his ear is near to the door outside. He doesn't want to come in. He's not, could not be induced to attend the service, but with his ear near to the door outside. So we know he's outside and he's near the door.
That's so interesting to me. I don't know, I found that really interesting. So this is a line, why I love this line is because it's a line of progression. So all the things I couldn't really understand before, like I was really against the feminist movement. And I just think it was because I was not understanding this. Like I didn't understand any of this. But now when you look at it at this level with God showing us the big picture of what he's been trying to do this whole time, it just, now everything makes sense. Now everything is clear and you can just see how God is really giving us a line of restoration, and we are at the very end of that restoration process. And it's just another confirmation that this is the last generation, that there is nothing more to come after this. So this is not only a line of restoration, but a reason why we're going to be, teaching Abraham is because he hasn't been here this whole time. He doesn't know this history. So when we get to heaven, we're going to be teaching them why these things are wrong, And so I just want to read this last paragraph because it's referring to the light that God has been shining all along this path. Is the light is getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And so you have, here it tells you, the crime of slighting the warnings of reproof as stated in our Savior's words, whosoever shall not receive you nor hear you. 104, 2.3. Hold on. I don't know, I think I might be missing part of it here. So there's a penalty which he has pronounced against offenders, and that makes them subject to the great displeasure of God. This sin, if not repented of, not confessed, but still retained and cherished, will bring them in the sight of God into a position worse than wicked Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment, because they had greater light than they of the doomed cities. So those who slight the warnings and reproofs, as you come down to the very end, the warnings and reproofs in this history, she says very clearly at the last sentence that they're in a position worse than wicked Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment, and it's because of the great light. So Sodom and Gomorrah is back here, but they're not going to be as, I guess, as badly punished, if you want to say that, than those of us living at the very end, because they only had so much light at this point. And so with that, I don't know if there are any questions, but we will close.
Where did you put the feminist movement in the 1800s time period? Remember, but I know that's on the external side when women, I know Ellen White gave the church, the counsel she received from God, but the outside world, the women were fighting for the right to vote, and they would be arrested, put in prison, shunned. Do you remember that history at all? Like, do you put that on the line as well?
That's part of that history, Sister.
Didn't Ellen White say that it was
That is
rebellion
part
to
of
wear
that
trousers?
history.
What?
That's part of that history, right?
Yeah, it is in the
In the
1800s.
time of the flappers.
Yeah.
Didn't she speak out against them, saying that it was rebellion to wear trousers?
But that's the whole point of the study,
What's the whole point?
that it wasn't their time.
It wasn't whose time?
It wasn't their time in the right time period. When she said that, it wasn't time. That dispensation, and it goes back to just dispensation, there are different rules and regulations that you are living under. And those change. We don't wear what Moses wore. And Ellen White didn't require them to wear what the requirements were there. A ribbon of blue around the hem of their garment. It's dispensational.
So in our dispensation, can we vote now as women or as Adventists? Forget the women part. Can we go and vote now for our president? We can.
Yes.
So that's said now. So now we have a referendum.
I mean, I'm just snapping that.
I never heard.
understood.
I never heard if we can or not. So now I want to know, is it allowed?
That's because that question came up and that's how I understood.
Go ahead.
I think so, that's a separate question, that's going to be the content.
So we can.
I think voting's
I voted for
going
Justin
to
Trudeau.
become an issue.
Did you? Because I would too, but I didn't go to the polls and I wanted to.
I did,
Yeah,
Cool.
I missed it. I was going to
Thank you.
but I'm also a rebel.
Because I
It's
wasn't
just something
sure.
outrageous.
I wasn't sure if we're allowed to or not, so I didn't. But I like him.
Okay, 2 minutes. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, I wanted to.
Is it?
No.
Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so just a minute, one of the statements about voting. One of the reasons why women were not allowed to vote is because they would have made the wrong choice in voting for somebody. And we are no more, in that position.
Yeah.
Now we know,
Now
who's
the
supposed to
lines
vote.
tell us who's gonna be
Exactly,
good or bad.
exactly. That's why, we can, now, vote. So,
Are you speaking out for everyone? Because that would not just include women, that would include men too.
Yeah.
Because everybody would need to know who to vote for.
Yeah.
Right?
go ahead, Susanna.
I want to make 2 points. I think
Do their part.
with parable teaching, we can put there's a gap there on the board with the diet thing, and I think we can probably put, I don't know what to put there, but vegetarian society, scientific inroads in health. At the time she's writing, they've got sanitarians springing up, they've got a massive explosion of information about cancer being caused by meat eating. We have got a huge, the world has gone ahead of us with the health message, and I think that's what we see with each line, that the world has become ahead and we've become the tail, and she uses that language, an animal language, that we've become the tail and we've become ahead with, and that we're catching up with the world in there. That's where we should, the tail that teaches lies. Well, that's
What do you want me to call that?
I don't know what we can say, but I'm sure that's when did vegetarian society start? I'm not sure. So I'm seeing as well that I think it's really good the way that you've written that out, because it's paralleling, those 3 lines parallel each other clearly. And if we're going to use parable teaching as a methodology, we're going to approach it and we're going to say these are parables. So what are these parables teaching us? And I'm just seeing there's a link between this imagery of animals. So if we look at the vegan line, we've got animals now, and the way they treat the animals, they're supposed to look after the animals, protect them, nurture them, be a blessing to them, and it's supposed to be an interactive relationship. But now they're eating them. And if you look at prophecy, we look at the charts, it's covered with animals, and these animals are symbols of the nations. I'm just thinking there's a line of progression here with the nations. So Israel's meant to be a blessing to the nations, they're meant to be a light to the whole earth. And instead they end up devouring the nations. It says devour much flesh, it's about nations attacking nations. So now Israel ends up, the very thing it's supposed to do, they end up cursing, there's a curse comes in. So they're a curse to the nations because they're disobedient all the way through, instead of being a light to the world. So now that's like they're eating the flesh and devouring the people instead of being a blessing. And then as we get to the end, they've got to stop eating this flesh because they're a curse to the nations instead of a blessing. So they have to be a blessing now and stop oppressing the nations. And instead of oppressing them, they're meant to look after them, nurture them, protect them. And then equality comes, and the slavery line, is I just haven't thought about it, can't remember, but the equality one is church and state, so it's to do with the nations again. So in the beginning, church and state are operating together and they're supposed to be in harmony, and then they go into sin. And because of that now, the church has to submit to the state. So we've got this dysfunctional relationship going on. And now we're seeing in our time, it has to be on a level. And the slavery line, Jew, Gentile, it's about how we treat the individual. There's got to be something more to that one as well. But I'm just seeing that progression. And if people could see that, they'd have no problem being vegetarian, they'd have no problem. I mean, it's a symbol, obviously, but it's a literal as well as a spiritual lesson in it, of how, because this animal imagery, it's all the way through the prophecies and about these nations being aggressive and attacking each other and blood shed. And what we've been dealing with Sister Terry, with this counterfeit line, it's all about force and oppression of nations, and because of the individuals in that nation. So maybe the slavery line is more about how we treat the individual, that now wish to see all nations as, all people as equals, as opposed to thinking we're better, that we're superior in any way.
Yeah,
As
the
a
whole,
church, because the Jews just thought they were superior.
all three of them are involved in pain and oppression, like pain for the animals. The slavery is a lot of oppression and it's just horrible. All of these things are just horrible, horrible things. And the time of Ellen White, when you read what was going on, it is disgusting.
Yeah.
And
Well, the other thing
if you just, the whole purpose and the whole point of the whole thing is that God wants us back to his original state, but our time is up. So.
Just the last point was he's dealing with a body of people. So he has individuals he could use in this history to say, for instance, in the time of the slavery thing, or equality with women. Time of Ellen White, she's saying women can be teachers, they can be pastors, they can be not maybe pastors, but leaders. They can be paid the same as the pastors, so he's got equal pay. So there's things in the time of Christ, he's ministering to Gentile women, and he's elevating the role of women and Gentiles in that history. So in both histories, they're trying to dispel the darkness on these issues, but they're not ready as a group of people, because God has to have a group, he has to have a church. So he has to lead a whole group, and it's not just about the individual. So he works with the society he's in to get the group together at the same time. And I think that's why it's been so limited in the other histories, because he can't do the whole group at this point because of the culture they're in, plus the fact that not everyone in the group is up to speed. So it's all about the church as a body of people. I think he's trying to raise it.
Okay. Let's pray. God in heaven, thank you so much for your Sabbath day, for a time of rest and a time where we can dream about the restoration that you have for us. And not only dream about it, Lord, but put into practice today with the things that you have opened up to us over the course of 6,000 years. You've been trying to restore your people into your image, to glorify you, to honor you. And we just pray, Lord, that we can be a part of that, that you would transform our hearts and our minds, that we would be so in tune with you that when we come to meet you, Lord, it will not be anything except for what we've always expected. Help us to see your glory. Help us to know your love and your goodness. And help us to also see the wickedness of sin and to shun it. We thank you, Lord, for teaching us, and we just ask you to continue to be with us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
That's a good study. Thank you.
25 minutes.